is a pretty important subject for me as a big picture thinker. This phenomenon of social values and environmental values has uh, started to preoccupy myself as well as a lot of people around the world. So, as most of you know, my name is Randall Adcock. I'm president of Wayfinders Business Co-operative. And the Wayfinders Business Cooperative is a democratic social enterprise made up of small businesses and some nonprofits, other cooperatives who come together to collaborate so everyone is successful in their business, whatever that might be. And today we've got a quick agenda. We'll do some introductions. I'm going to provide a background for this project, and we'll have then presentation and followed by discussion, question and answers to tease out the implications of this, maybe look for some ways to improve it or go beyond it to the next steps. So I guess we'll ask the members of the team now to introduce themselves. Start with, let's say, June.
Thanks, Randall. Very happy to be here today. So my name is June Kim, and I'm in my final year at the University of Toronto. I'm enrolled in the Rotman Commerce program, and I'm studying a specialist in management with a focus in finance. And last summer, I worked at Accenture in their management consulting department, specifically with the CFO and enterprise value team. And I'll pass it off to Huon to continue the introductions.
Everyone, very nice to meet you and to be here today. My name is Hiwon, and I'm also in my final year, graduating soon from Rotman Commerce. I'm studying management with a focus in finance, and I have a background in finance as well. I worked in investment banking last summer, and I'll be going there full time too. And I'll pass it off to Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Yuan. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie. I'm also in my fourth year at Rotman Commerce, specializing in management with a focus in finance. And I also have some experience in finance as well. Last summer, I was in sales and trading within their equity derivatives team. And I guess I'll pass it off to Angad.
Angad?
Hi, everyone. My name is Angad. So I'm also in the Rotman Commerce program, and I've also just completed my fourth year. And I've gained experience in working at finance and technology firms like banks like TD and BMO in the past. So this is just an interesting subject that I decided to enroll in as part of the Rotman Commerce program. And I was pretty happy with all the knowledge I gained so far and the experience that I gained to working on this project.
Thank you. And missing from the team is Anne.
Okay. So she's not able to join today, but we'll be covering her parts.
All right. And since we are a small group, I know a number of people had indicated interest in being here today, but just weren't able to make it. But Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Kevin McNulty. My company is the Canadian Institute for International Trade. And I've been working in a number of areas: software development, simulation-based learning for the oil and gas industry, gamification, games for health, games for management, those sorts of things. My focus over the last 5 or 6 years has been kind of building on the notion of learning, looking at how we identify and capture knowledge and intellectual capital in organizations, and how we migrate it from what would have been considered intangible assets at one time to a concrete value for an organization that can actually be added to their balance sheet and can be used to create new revenue streams. And so I'm working with an organization called Areopa now that focuses on doing that for organizations. And I would, for anyone that is in the MBA or a business education process, I would recommend that each of you actually Google, or actually just have a look at the Areopa website, reopa.com, and something that will be of, I think, tremendous value for you folks as you begin your careers. This is not a pitch, by the way. This is just another thing like ESG and whatnot that is becoming much more valued and recognized as having tremendous value for organizations.
All right, thank you. And Rocky, could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm with the Solar Power Investment Cooperative of Edmonton. We are launching our first project raise on May 4th at Roundhouse. We are partnering on our first project to maximize the social impacts, working with a solar installer who hires and trains people at the margins, and with Bissell Center, the recipient of the solar system will be the Bissell Center, whose mandate is to end poverty.
All right, thank you. And so I'm going to give a bit of a background as to why we undertook this project at all, and try and make a case for the urgency of all of this. So we felt the need to broaden our notion of value beyond the money and material goods that we have come to love and collect so much over the last few decades or maybe centuries. Reconfiguring our place in the big picture here, because we humans are value generators, starting with the diverse range of natural talents that have come with us in our genetic heritage. That diversity means that we were meant to be social animals. We were meant to be sharing and collaborating with our diverse skills and orientations. At the same time, we as social animals, we've kind of got off to a bit of a rough start there. I would have to point one finger at, let's say, the double entry accounting system that started over 600 years ago, that brought into sharp focus the importance of money itself. And it was that old adage that what gets measured gets done. So everybody becomes very profit oriented. And yet the things that are not easily measured have become ignored. We know about the hierarchy of needs that starts at the bottom with basic needs for air, water, food, etc. And the message that we have biologically is strong. It tells us you're hungry, you need to breathe, you need to drink. There's no doubt about it. But as those basic needs are met, the higher needs, like need for social belonging, it's not quite as clear. Need for intellectual curiosity. Well, a lot of people are getting by without being curious these days. They're really happy, but they can't really put their finger on what's missing. And mastery of a product. If you are able to achieve mastery, it's a great sense of satisfaction. But again, you may not notice that it's missing in your life. Know that something's missing. And so you can escalate through this hierarchy of needs. And as you get closer to the top, it becomes more and more intangible, to use the language that Kevin was talking about. It becomes harder to quantify, measure, and report. So the feedback loops that we have in personal growth and development have more to do with our own internal reflection. But if we could find a way to measure these things more easily, like our social impact on people, the benefits that we share, then we're all going to be much happier. I do believe that there's some urgency in this, because there has been a systemic bias introduced by looking at money alone. I've got nothing against money or profits, but we know from psychology that more money does not produce more happiness at some point. Studies have shown that if you're making a comfortable living at $60,000, $100,000 a year, your desire to make more money is not becoming prominent in your mind. You're thinking about quality of life. And so we need to be able to assist people to find that path that leads them to that to meet those higher needs. We have some old adages that kind of tell us we're on the right path. Money can't buy happiness, and variety and moderation in all things is an ancient kind of European adages for how to live a good life. In the Chinese tradition, there's the yin and yang, the need to find the right balance in life. In Buddhism, we have the Eightfold Path of Righteousness. It's how to live a good life. There are structures here, but we have largely neglected them in the Western world. And because of our technological progress over the last couple of hundred years, we've really led the world into a mindset that places a disproportionate value on material things that can be measured and the money that comes along with those. So we need, I think, to face a bit of a backlash, I guess you could say, or perhaps it's a balancing effort. So we have initiatives such as the ESG or B Corp certification, LEED, DEI. These are certification initiatives that help us to measure, quantify, track, and report our performance on social and environmental impacts. But unfortunately, many of these certifications are beyond the reach of the self-employed person, the sole proprietor, micro businesses, and so on. So we're trying to establish a certification process, if you want to call it that, for the small businesses. And one of the reasons why this is urgent is that things have changed even in the last couple of months with the introduction of ChatGPT and awareness that there's been a lot of AI progress kind of beneath the surface. It is now becoming a very accelerated race. And I was talking to someone who was in a seminar or webinar with Deloitte the other day, and who was told by Deloitte that they've done a study and they estimate that in the next 5 years, 50% of the workforce will become redundant due to the introduction of AI. Well, I've been working and playing with ChatGPT to build Wayfinders components, and I am blown away. It is truly amazing. But the impacts are just beyond comprehension. And so we need better ways to move beyond the dollars and cents accounting. Because even if we are all put on, or many of us have to resort to a guaranteed basic income, that meets our basic needs, but we are value generators and we need to find our higher purpose in life. We need to find meaning in our life. Even today, studies show that 60% of the workforce are not happy with their work. They find their work to be meaningless. And this is due largely to automation and standardization of processes that achieve high mass economies of scale. So how do we bring this down to a human scale when people are self-employed? We're going to have to address a system here that is easily accessible, perhaps in the cloud environment, hopefully within the Wayfinders Business Cooperative cloud, a set of tools that will help people manage themselves, not just to maximize profit, unless we want to redefine profit to include social and environmental value as well, which is a possibility. But there is this urgency, I believe, to get this in place so that even if we're able to have a sustainable income, we still need to be able to actualize our potential and achieve a certain level of, let's say, transcendence if we're on that journey. And so we've asked the students here at the Rotman School to come up with an approach that is accessible by small businesses so they can actually set goals, track their performance against those goals, and report. partly for their own benefit, but perhaps to also share with the community, so everyone gets a better sense of where we stand with regard to one another in our performance on social and environmental matters. And just on a note before I have the students present, we have lined up another group of 5 students, those from a cloud computing program at Humber College, to take the next step and automate this process. So they're going to be looking at building an accounting system, probably starting with an open source accounting system, and adapting it so that it can accommodate not only social impacts, but local currency or barter credits. So that's the end of my, let's say, backgrounder to set the stage for this presentation. And I would hand the floor over now to our students.
Okay, I guess we'll take the floor from here. So, as Randall has kindly said, this is our social impact policies and protocols, and as he has mentioned, a lot of the certifications out there, such as the B Corp certification, we felt weren't really applicable to SMBs or small and medium-sized businesses. So, essentially, I guess we were hired to help out, come up with a policy document that is more relevant to those enterprises.
So just to kind of highlight again the purpose of our policy document, like Juno just said, we really wanted to tackle one of the main challenges, which is the current sustainability transition is really catered towards larger businesses that have access to far greater resources and more expertise. And so our document is meant to focus on a couple of global sustainability standards, a couple of which include like the B Corp, fair trade standards, ESG, and etc. And we highlight a couple of key values as well. And within each key value, we highlighted some key performance indicators that we believe will help you with your sustainability goals. And so if we move forward onto the next page, we're going to be covering around 10 key values today, and a little bit of each and a couple of the KPIs that we were able to gather from our research. So we'll start off with governance.
Yeah, so to begin with governance, we realize that this is just a key element at all these corporations to make sure that they're being run effectively. And really, there can be 2 divisions, one being legal frameworks that companies should meet, but then also additional policies that can be implemented to enhance the company's effectiveness, to improve the experience that workers have, and for all these other factors. So we broke this down into 4 aspects. The first part is complying with regulations. This includes things like completing all documentation, so meeting all corporate records and making sure that they're delivered for examination in a timely manner, applying for a federal business number before beginning operations, having all board members openly disclose conflicts of interest, and also having all of them involved in a voting process, whether to decide there is a conflict of interest or not. And then lastly, also to have guarantee that the financial information is accurate for several documents that are required in the cabinet submission, estimates, financial statements, and letters of representation. So all of this just ensures that the regulations are met and that there's no sort of breach. And then we also looked at the inclusion policies. Now, this is just the idea that businesses should try to mitigate all sorts of biases, whether racial, ethnic, or gender-based, when hiring employees. This naturally shouldn't come at the cost of recruiting top talent. So there's some sort of balancing required. But some of the policies that can be implemented are ensuring that there's some sort of diversity within the management team and the board of directors. This might not be necessarily just based on a racial or ethnic variety, but this could also be things like what sort of their educational background is or their work experience, which can provide a more holistic range of perspectives when making decisions. Also, this would just lead on to having a diversity of strengths and experiences within the board of directors. This is something that companies might have to look more into and see how they can implement. But if it is possible for them to get experienced directors from different streams who have diverse backgrounds from various industries, that can just provide them with more perspectives on how to tackle certain situations. The third thing we looked at was misconduct related policies and training. So there are often different misconduct related issues that might occur at workplaces. And so employees should be trained on how to deal with them. So there can be a harassment prevention policy to prevent workplace misconduct. There can also be training sessions to make sure that employees learn about how to deal with these situations. The businesses should also have an anti-money laundering policy in order to make sure that people know how to deal with situations if they occur in this matter. And there should also be training sessions for the values and the purpose of the company to ensure that people are aligned strongly with the goals and the mission. Lastly, the thing we looked at under governance was the director's knowledge and responsibilities. And this is basically based around the idea that the directors must behave ethically and in the best interest of the company. So to do this, the application document that the company has must display the code of conduct for directors, and they must have a policy on conflicts of interest that I discussed previously. The directors must be informed about the company's mission, values, general activities, and industry trends. The latter is especially important for an industry that sees continuous changes across time. And they must not directly or indirectly accept cash, gifts, gratuities, or privileges that can lead to them being influenced and changing the corporation's activities. So these are all the main aspects of governance, and we can now move on to labor standards. So labor standards have changed a lot over time, and today a lot of these are legally regulated by different provinces and different countries, having many similar frameworks, but also some differences. And today the labor standards also have additional policies at some companies to make sure that workers have a better work-life balance. So we can dive deeper into the specific policies. The first one would be bias avoidance. Now, this is similar to a previous policy since a lot of these policies have some sort of an overlap. But once again, bias avoidance would be to make sure that there is no sort of bias against people of a certain ethnicity or just any sort of background when hiring them. Employees should have the same rate of pay for the same sort of a job. No potential employee should be rejected or fired simply based on their background or their ethnicity. And 100% of the workforce should go through diversity training, which would include things like learning about anti-racism or anti-sexism at workplaces. This can just make the workplace a more safe and welcoming environment for everyone. The other aspect would be compensation. So companies shouldn't be able to lay off people like pregnant workers, or they should also be providing maternity leave to people. Another aspect of this would be that if an employee has to attend a meeting or training session for under 3 hours during their time off, they have to be compensated with 3 hours of pay. So this is one specific aspect of compensation that we found that is used in Alberta. This leads to the work hours. So a lot of this is just legally regulated. This has quite a few policies in it. For example, a 30-minute break must be given to workers if their shift is between 5 to 10 hours, and 2 of these breaks are required for shifts over 10 hours. Employees may not work over 12 hours a day unless an exception occurs, and in such cases, they would have to fill out paperwork. Employees are also entitled to at least 1 day of rest each work week, 2 consecutive days in 2 consecutive work weeks, 3 in 3 weeks, 4 in 4 weeks, and so on. But this cannot go on every single week, and they would have to discuss this. And lastly, there's the work retention, which is that businesses should see that most of their members do not leave the organization. And in order to ensure that top talent remains, they should aim for an employee retention ratio of 90%, which essentially just means that 90% of those joining the organization stay with the company. So that covers the employee standards. I can also cover a bit of human rights since Anne won't be able to join us today. So human rights is fairly similar, and there is a bit of an overlap. It's just the idea that human rights are extremely important, and at workplaces, this is really key to ensuring that people feel safe and welcomed. So some of the policies within this, next slide, please. So the first policy in this is human resources. So all employees should have an official employment status within the company and know the terms of their employment contract and relationship. Layoffs should be fair and they should be administered legally with accordance to laws and bargaining agreements. And there should be a defined approach to providing decent working conditions for all sorts of employees, including student workers. Under workplace health and safety, there should be appropriate compensation benefits and services to night workers. All employees should receive adequate and appropriate training for carrying work safety. This is especially important for those doing more dangerous jobs. And businesses should incorporate the most protective applicable health and safety standards into their operational practices. So I can now pass it on to Hyewon, who can cover the rest of this.
Yep, so I can also cover employee benefits on the next page. And so employee benefits really builds on top of labor standards. So beyond ensuring just employee protection, you also want to incorporate more employee benefit protocols, which can also help with boosting employee morale, productivity, and helping your workers to really identify more with your organization. So in terms of the KPIs, a lot of these are really legally required. We split it mainly into two sections. So we have working hours and parental leave, and then harassment and union protection. So under the first, it mainly covers things that we should be incorporating, such as giving minimum holiday leave, not incentivizing employees to give up their leave, and making sure that overtime guidelines are in place according to provincial standards as well. And in terms of harassment and union protection, we want to make sure that our business environment is more so encouraging of reporting any violations or anything that has to do with harassment, intimidation, and also respecting union members and representatives, and also allowing employees to discuss as they need during work breaks and giving work breaks as needed. And moving on to community relations. And so in terms of community involvement, this is really an essential component really to building a more holistic sustainability strategy. It allows your business to demonstrate commitment to the well-being of the local community, and not only allows you to promote more of a positive image in the eyes of both customers and potential customers and other stakeholders, but also to boost overall employee morale as well. So in terms of our KPIs, we divided it into social impact as well as economic impact on the next page. And so in terms of social impact, there are several ways that we can keep track, or several measures that we can use. First, there are more charitable donations. You can set different benchmarks and goals to donate a certain amount of goods or organize different initiatives based on a cause that you're all passionate about, which would also help to boost employee morale and more so identifying with the business's mission. You can also volunteer, and there are a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can try to encourage your employees to volunteer on their own time, or more so what could be helpful is organizing company or business-wide events to get more involved in community initiatives. And then volunteer hours can be tracked, which is another tracking metric. And in terms of sponsorship, we can track the number of any sponsored events or organizations within the local community. This can be, extracurricular activities or sports teams, depending on the business's values as well. And in terms of more economic impact, you can track social media engagement, seeing how much the level of support is from the surrounding community through engagement metrics like likes, comments, shares, etc. on your posts on social media platforms, gauging customer and employee feedback to assess how these efforts are being perceived, tracking the number of partnerships and how you're able to help one another, and seeing also what these effects are overall on business growth and impact. So establishing more so the return on investment on these types of efforts. And then we head into more gender and diversity. So of course, there are a lot of different ways that embracing more DE&I in the workplace can help to really boost overall business productivity as well, but also recognizing the importance of respecting unique experiences and perspectives and backgrounds. And so we decided to split the KPIs into 3 different buckets. First of all, education and accountability. And so implementing different types of training, keeping track of training efforts and participation, as well as maybe implementing some sort of system to allow complaints to come in anonymously and incorporating a system to deal with these complaints. In terms of equality, taking a look at advancement opportunities in the workplace, making sure that or gauging representation at all levels over time to determine whether advancement in career development is being offered equitably, and also looking at pay and benefit equity. So implementing a system or maybe conducting pay equity audits to establish any potential gaps across any significant groups. And also recruitment and retention benchmarks are highly recommended to assess the makeup of candidates that are being hired or retained, and to see how effective the DEI efforts are being implemented into the workplace. And in terms of inclusion, again, gauging representation in the overall workforce. So the gender demographic breakdown by level and function, keeping track of other third-party diversity like customers, suppliers, other stakeholders, and also gauging employee satisfaction are some other ways that we can keep track of more inclusivity measures within the workplace.
Yeah, so now I'll be discussing customer satisfaction and fair pricing. And before we kind of delve into the KPIs, I think customer satisfaction is very relevant for Wayfinders Business Cooperative, given that it's a member community filled with, small and medium-sized businesses. And oftentimes, if let's say you're looking at a local tailor, oftentimes the competitors do tend to be some big name players like Harry Rosen, right? How is someone at such a small scale supposed to compete against Harry Rosen, right? So I think, where they really kind of the selling point for these businesses would be sort of the services that they offer to the consumers, right? And a lot of it is through word of mouth referrals as well, is sort of their marketing, given that they tend to have lower marketing budgets as well. So I'm going to kind of delve into the KPIs that we decided to use for customer satisfaction and fair pricing. So just sort of the overview that I want to kind of go into is that, the success of, small and medium-sized business do tend to be, like I said, customer satisfaction, right? If you look at that quote on the bottom left-hand corner, it says, according to a survey done by eMarketer, customer satisfaction acquisition are the primary outcomes used to assess the success of their company. And I was actually surprised because these metrics were considered more important than financial metrics like revenue and profit, which, you would assume that a lot of companies base their success off of. And as Randall said, I guess, money really isn't the end all be all for some of these companies. So that was a really interesting point that I saw during my research. And I think, more oftentimes than not, customer satisfaction and fair pricing do go hand in hand. If someone sees some intrinsic value in a product, or they really do like the service that a company does offer, and they see some sort of pricing, whether it might be a bit high or not, they might consider that fair, just given that, that the satisfaction they derive from that product or service, kind of outweighs the cost that they're paying for it, right? And the next one I want to talk about data protection and privacy. If I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have a lot of expertise in this area. I think the cloud computing students from Humber could help out with this a lot, given that they are working in cloud computing, and I'm sure they deal with a lot of cybersecurity as well. So, today we're seeing a lot of companies, especially small and medium-sized businesses within Canada, adopting technology and digital capabilities. And with that comes certain threats, through the use of hackers, for example, or stealing personal data. So now I'll be kind of delving into the KPIs we can, explore, and also sort of the safeguards that we can use to prevent such threats from, destroying a small and medium-sized business within Wayfinders. So the two categories that I want to focus on are risk management and incident response. Risk management specifically. So we're looking at the risk assessments that can measure the potential risk, security risks that are, posed to sensitive data by identifying vulnerabilities and weaknesses in an organization's security posture. And then the second point that I want to point out is measuring the effectiveness of vulnerability management processes, including scanning, patch management, and testing, which aims to reduce the number and severity of IT system vulnerabilities. And then sort of the second category that we can look at is incident response. So, how long does it take to detect and respond to such data breaches, or sort of the incident response time, which measures the response process efficacy, with a shorter time indicating higher effectiveness. And then the last one is the security incident response time, which measures the duration of response to a security incident and aims to minimize response time to prevent further damage to effective systems or data. And I think this is definitely an area we could expand more on, just given, how much more, development there is being in the technology world, especially with the introduction of AI. And I'll be passing it off to Julie to talk about climate change.
Yeah, so moving on to our next key value, climate change is obviously one of the most pressing issues that I think a lot of people have been and are continuing to be talking about more casually, and as what we're seeing in the news and stuff. And that's just because it not only has catastrophic effects on the natural environment, but also financially on the economy, as well as individuals and in our own society and our everyday life. And so businesses have a pretty large role to play in addressing this, just because by reducing their greenhouse gases, for example, and promoting more sustainable practices, they kind of have the ability to mitigate their impact on climate change, and that helps them contribute to a more sustainable future for everyone. So moving on to the next slide, we divided up the KPIs into 4 broad buckets within the environment and climate change. The first one being energy use and efficiency. So the first one just being, as simple as it sounds, energy consumption, how much business is consuming their energy, which can be measured in either kilowatt hours or BTUs, as well as the energy intensity, which is essentially just how much the company or that division of the company is consuming energy divided by their output or level of activity. The next one is carbon footprint. And so this entails emissions like greenhouse gases, like nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, as well as the different types of emissions, so scope 1, 2, and 3. And this includes the energy that the business itself consumes, as well as their supply chain. And then again, we have carbon intensity similar to energy, as well as carbon offsetting, which is a way for businesses to compensate their emissions by reducing their greenhouse gases or removing carbon from the atmosphere, for example, or even investing in more sustainable and renewable energy projects. And then the last one there being supply chain emissions. And so this is associated with the production and transportation of their raw materials, as well as their packaging. Moving on to water and waste, we have water consumption as well as waste generation. So that's just how much water that the business is using per unit of production or for each employee, as well as how much waste that they're consuming. And this can be broken down into hazardous versus not hazardous waste, as well as sustainable materials. So is the business engaging in initiatives that would help them reduce packaging or implement more circular economic practices and recycling materials, or just any general efforts to manage materials in a more environmentally conscious way. And lastly, we have biodiversity conservation. And so this just refers to how the company's impacts on like their surrounding habitats, the biodiversity, as well as any species that might be affected by their operations. And so a business could even partner with like conservation organizations or something like that, for example, and like work on reforestation projects. And yeah, like I guess and moving on to our next on final, I guess, key value would be supply chain best practices. So just across industries and companies, both like SMEs and larger corporations, I think this is pretty applicable. It's just businesses have to recognize that they have to manage their supply chain for their social and environmental impacts, because they have the responsibility to ensure that their products aren't being produced in exploitative labor practices or with excessive damages to the environment or in any other unethical ways. And so on the next slide, we see we've divided up these into 3 broad categories for our KPIs. The first one being supplier screening. And so there's kind of 2 different methods that SME could use, either risk-based or impact-based screening. Risk-based screening is essentially just avoiding negative impacts and reputational harm, with an emphasis on topics like human rights violations or violations of environmental laws. Whereas impact-based screening focuses more on positive practices or attributes of the company. So this could entail things like innovative environmental management practices or job opportunities for people who might be traditionally more underserved or from underrepresented backgrounds. And lastly, the third one there under supplier screening is scope. And so just as a best practice, it's best to prioritize your time towards companies that are comprised like a larger part of your supply chain, rather than long tails of purchases from smaller accounts. And this can just be done through cost or volume of purchases, such as like by identifying the largest suppliers or a supplier that takes up maybe like 90% of your purchases. Next, we have information gathering. And so these are kind of 3 different, methods of gathering information. The first one just being supplier surveys and visits. So you could either just flat out like ask your supplier for information that's not publicly available that they haven't yet disclosed, or you could take like a factory visit to one of their like operations. The second one being third-party audits, and this is for like the highest level of verification and collecting information, but it's also most expensive. But it can ensure independent validation of the information that they're giving you. And so it also, like assurance providers for supply chain information also include like traditional accounting and assurance companies, but also like sustainable consultants and other nonprofits. And lastly, it's really important to be aware of just how much a SME is purchasing from their supplier, because this indicates how much potential influence they have and thus their purchasing power. And so that allows them to focus their efforts on parts of their purchasing that are more actionable, which means, whether you can reasonably take your business elsewhere, how much leverage that you have against them. And lastly, the last KPI is just about maximizing impact. So it's really important for the SME to create like a supplier code of conduct with their suppliers. This just ensures that everything's like, written on paper, that they've signed it, and they've had like a written promise to these procedures. And, if there's any way to address like non-compliance, then that can also be like resolved through that way. Next is also important to support their improvement. So that's both in supporting companies to be compliant with their code of conduct, but also to help them go like above and beyond the minimum requirements, as well as providing technical support or capacity building to those businesses who might need it a little bit more. Next, we have transparency and reporting, which is just about sharing strategies and methods, as well as like raw data and highlighting success stories that might be able to, help out other suppliers in the supply chain that could be shared more broadly. And lastly, the best method to actually improve performance over time has been proven is like by setting realistic but aspirational targets for your supply chain. So, for example, if your company is focusing on increasing the diversity of ownership in their supply chain, they could try to, set targets in terms of how many minority owned or like underrepresented suppliers that they have in their supply chain, or you can measure that through like dollars spent or whatever measurement that you want to use in that. That's just an example of an ambitious but like realistic target that you can set. But yeah, so those are pretty much the 10 key values that we kind of felt that were the most important. And yeah, now we'll open up the floor for any questions that you guys might have.
Wow, amazing. Thank you very much. This is really far beyond my hopes and expectations. I know we've been working together over the last couple of months and I've seen your progress, but this presentation really blows me away. Thank you. Thank you very much for doing this. Now, if we could clear the screen back to our headshots. Are you? Yeah, let's do that. Okay. I just also want to mention that Jeremy Lucan has joined us, and he's been working with us in developing programming for community economic development and the social economy. So I'm going to invite our other guests here today, Kevin, Rocky, and Jeremy, to comment on this presentation. Who'd like to go first?
I'll go first. Great presentation, folks. Just absolutely phenomenal. It does my heart good to see that the future captains of industry have got some of these ethical things nailed and are placing the proper value on them. I made a few notes as we went along. The common theme in my thoughts was that we speak a lot to KPIs and success metrics and whatnot, but I think it's really important. 2 points. One is that the embracing ethical protocols does not have to be at odds with profit. In my mind. So I don't think they should be viewed as somehow in conflict. And in fact, in order for organizations to embrace these these protocols, I think it's important that it be presented in a way that not necessarily or that speaks not only to the correctness of doing things this way, but how doing it this way can create more profit for your business. So, for example, when you talk about recruitment and retention benchmarks, that's an absolutely critical metric right there of how this works. When your organization has a much better recruitment a statistic than the competitor, then that will give you a competitive advantage. And those are things that need to be looked at. So in each of these cases, what I might like to see is somehow the business case for each of these KPIs built in. Why would you want to do this, and how can it profit your organization? And I think that can be done. And that's coming back to what Randall was talking about earlier around having some program to be able to track all these things and actually put a dollar figure on them. And I think that's very possible. In fact, I think it's necessary because organizations, particularly small and medium enterprises, will not typically embrace procedures, processes because it's the right thing to do. They'll embrace them once they have realized that it will be profitable. Reducing your turnover, your supply chain, all of these things. Optimizing your supply chain is good for business. It's not just the right thing to do; it's good for business. One of the things that I thought might be missing from the slide 8, which was security, and that is security around trade secrets and knowledge capital in an organization. That is absolutely critical, and in fact, that's one of the things that hackers seem to like to try and steal. So those are my few comments.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I think although our students here are moving on to other things, you've just planted the idea in my head to actually prepare those business cases, a little bit more elaboration on these, and make it available online on our Wayfinders website. I think that that's a very good point. Rocky, how about you? Any comments? On mute, we're on mute.
I don't think I have too much intelligent to say or anything helpful to say other than, the presentation, was pretty comprehensive and started me thinking beyond what Spice is currently doing. We have a very simple certification via by social. So it's not B Corp status, but really what the by social certification asks for is for social purpose enterprises to embed in their bylaws and articles of incorporation that at least 50% of any profits will go back into the social purpose. This is way beyond anything I've considered. And I think, it's so easy to greenwash these days. Having something as comprehensive as you've put together is helpful. So basically, I can't say anything because you're kind of over my head, but thanks.
Well, that's very flattering there, Rocky. But I know that Rocky and I recently attended a social procurement trade show here at MacEwan University, which was quite interesting and well attended. Guest speakers were amazing. So there is traction, there is progress and movement here to address the importance of social and environmental values and embrace them. And more of the large corporations and governments are actually putting a social procurement component into their RFPs. Now, Jeremy, what kind of thoughts have you got to share with us today about what you've seen today?
Sure. I was very impressed with the presentation. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm just out right now, but yeah, I think that you were very thorough, and I'm really impressed with the program that you guys are taking part in. I wish that there was more of a focus on like the social goals of business when I was in my MBA program. And I think that you're sort of in an area where there was a void when just a few years ago I was in school. So I think you guys should be very proud of the work that you're doing. And I think that it speaks to your values and what you will bring to the business world going forward. The only thing that I didn't really see touched on in the presentation, and that's no fault of your own, I think it's like a growing area, is when it comes to gender and diversity. I've found that class is sort of that missing piece, that we don't focus on how to include people that come from different class like structure within society, people that maybe weren't included in more like white collar jobs, and just how we can incorporate them into business. That's pretty much all that I wanted to say, but yeah, keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. And that's interesting because, that come to think of it, I mean, coming from a lower socioeconomic class myself, I was very lucky in the 70s to get, the support I needed to go to university, the first in my extended family. There are systemic barriers based on the socioeconomic class, and we often forget that. Now, back to the students, do you guys have any comments or further thoughts? Do you want to address some of the comments made by our the guests today? Anyone?
I guess just on Jeremy's comment about incorporating socioeconomic class, I find that to be a very interesting observation too. I mean, when I was conducting research, I think there just isn't as much coverage, if any. And so I guess, yeah, I think that's a really great observation. And you're right. I think there should be more coverage of that. And I hope to see that become more recognized going forward. So just wanted to echo that statement.
Thank you, Ivan. June, did you have some thoughts to share?
Oh, I was actually going to touch on the same thing as Huon. I think like Jeremy's absolutely correct. Like when it comes to DE and I think socioeconomic classes tend to kind of fall out of not interest, but like out of the topic. So I think that's a really interesting point.
And it's a kind of a slippery question. I mean, I know some people from my own social class who don't come across very well in a job interview because of the slang they may use, or they're not dressed really, sharply, and so on. The subtle little signals that tell us that they're a little different. But I think that over the next while, we're going to be faced with even greater social diversity, which kind of constrains our ability to see ourselves in other people. And so we have to become much more conscious and do our due diligence to get past our initial impressions, to understand the deeper common humanity among us, whether it's the differences in intelligence or in economic or social background, ethnicity, whatever. We need to become better at seeing the common humanity within each of us. June, you have a further thought?
Yeah, just a final thought. I think that's oftentimes why politicians are often attacked, because a lot of them try to come off as populist, but they haven't really lived through certain socioeconomic classes, so they're not able to really speak on behalf of that certain class, right? Because oftentimes they come from wealthy backgrounds, right? So I think like experiences really define who you can really speak for sometimes in politics.
Right. I'm wondering if anyone here today has any advice or comments, thoughts to pass on to the students who will be undertaking the automation of this certification system, this protocol.
Just one other comment on building on the previous comment there. Another area that may be underrepresented is people with disabilities. For example, I've been working with a group for several years now called Autism Today, and our mandate is to kind of provide resources for people with on the spectrum, and also potential employers to bring them all kind of together. So, and again, when you talk about the profit aspect of diversity, in a sense, if you're able to take people off the welfare system and through by applying inclusivity and diversity to your workforce practices, you are supporting their migration from welfare to, in other words, from recipients of the tax dollar to contributors to the tax content. So more argument for, and again, in a number of cases now, there are some policies around various government programs to support assisting people on welfare, disabilities or otherwise, to transition to the workplace, and they can be very positive, and if they're supported through grant and funding programs, then that makes it even that's money well spent. If you're moving people from recipients to contributors to the tax pot, then that's a great thing. And the other thing, of course, from a mental health point of view, those very folks who are able to transition to meaningful employment have much healthier and productive lives and live longer, and all of that stuff, which is not simply intangible. It speaks to a measurable reduction in the load on our healthcare system.
Right. I am reminded of what I learned many years ago about the culture of poverty and the cycle of generation to generation poverty, and is how important it is to enable people to enter the workforce so that they aren't, I hate to say it, a liability to society, drawing on social insurance and so on, but actually are contributing and contributing value and paying taxes, and hate to put it so crass terms, but I think that we need to understand better all the human potential that each individual brings, and let's learn to exploit it, capitalize on it, leverage it, whatever you want to call it. Maybe we need to change our language, but we're a better society if we are able to better recognize the talents that people have, the unique cluster of skills, abilities, knowledge, and interest. I want to also recognize those who are not here today. Anne, our student, Shannon, who was a part of this project right from the start, but also Anne Armstrong, Professor Anne Armstrong, who was leading the course that the students were taking in social impacts. I'm going to be sharing this video with a number of people who are associated with Wayfinders. Mark Anilski was supposed to be with us today, but in the last minute was not able to join us. He's one of our local experts and is well known, who is able to consult on the economics of happiness and intangibles, similar to Kevin. In fact, I believe, Kevin, you've worked with Mark Anilski, haven't you?
I believe so, yeah. Yes, I have, in fact.
Are there any other final words that you would like to offer before we close it down for today? Well, if not, then I want to thank everyone for your contributions and the participants today in your comments and feedback. This is toward a very important cause, as the numbers of people who are struggling with self-employment or gig work, freelancing, whatever you want to call it, is going to be growing because of automation and standardization and economies of scale. And we have to kind of come up with a paradigm shift here to facilitate individuals in successfully participating in the economy, doing what they were born and evolved to do, which is to create value, a meaningful value. Anyone else? Any final words? Then I will just say thank you very much. And that's it for today. And we'll look forward to another webinar another day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
you.
you so much.